If you haven't been there, come visit us. We're in the former Abercrombie and Fitch store. And we also have a pop-up downtown in the former American Apparel. We like clothes stores. And we're there for the month of December, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from
Where
11.
again?
The old American Apparel across from Zoccoli's.
Oh,
Yeah, and it's free. We love donations, but we're doing that 3 days a week on the weekends. So bring kids or tell people about it. Tomorrow we're having a DJ family dance from 5 to 7:30. So yeah. So Brenda and I cooked this idea up about 4 years ago. So we've been having many lectures, and we've seen some of you at many of them, and glad to see new faces. Tell other people about our series. Speaking of that, we have a survey where we would really love your input to find out what you're interested in. We can come up with things we're interested in, but we want to know what our visitors and people in the community would like to have us find resources for. So that's one thing, and I would like to introduce Dr.
Could I just add, actually, it's a bit more fundamental than that.
Oh.
We have had feedback already that people are finding downtown difficult to get to, and there's been an offer from the Aptos library that we could hold them down there. They have a meeting room there, and they may be extending their hours. So there is an offer to have these at the Aptos library instead, Aptos branch library, and we can also consider different days or times. So please sort of do what you can with the survey. If you have a preference, let us know, because we're looking at a little bit of a change if that's what people are would like, as well as the actual topics.
do you have an email notification list?
No, we don't. Oh, no. But that's a good idea.
Yeah, so we could do that. We could even set that up tonight where people sign up and we let you know the results of the survey even.
Yeah.
And you can always go to the museum website to find out what's happening, and that's Santa Cruz Children's Museum of Discovery.org. Somebody have a question? Okay, great.
Where's the survey?
The survey's on the table, so you can do that after. Thank you. Great. I am excited to introduce to you Dr. Tiffany Wise-West, and she will tell you more about herself and her role and the vital role that she's playing in our community. So, thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for showing up. I know your time is valuable, and I really appreciate you coming and being engaged in this topic. As Petri said, I'm Tiffany Wise-West. I'm the Sustainability and Climate Action Coordinator for the City of Santa Cruz. I've been in this role for about a year. Prior to that, I've worked on and off in different roles with the Climate Action Program. So do have some history with the city. In terms of just a little short bio, I started my career in environmental civil engineering, primarily doing water, wastewater, and solid waste engineering. Came a bit disenfranchised with the heavy construction methods, became interested in green infrastructure and green buildings, and went up to UCSC and did a PhD and was able to transition my career into renewable energy sustainability, carbon accounting, and now climate adaptation. So that's kind of a real brief background on where I'm coming from. Adaptation for me is kind of a new area to add to my skill set. When I came into this job a year ago, we realized, oh geez, it's time to update the Climate Adaptation Plan. And so it is a new area for me. I'm continually learning. And this presentation, or really it's a partial presentation, partial sets of activities that I'm going to be sharing with you tonight is the result of a year's worth of studies and analysis to update our climate adaptation plan. This is really the soft launch of a 6 to 9 month outreach campaign that we're embarking on, and this is the first event. So what I'm showing you and the activities that we're going to be doing together are new. So please, if I get a little off track or it's a little shaky, forgive me. This is the first time I'm giving this kind of version of this engagement event. On that note, I just, as we develop these activities and the outreach events, we consulted with folks, nonviolent communication people, with technical experts, and so forth, to really formulate an engagement strategy that engages the community in what we're doing at the city in terms of both planning and action around climate adaptation. Yeah, so let's jump right into it then. And feel free at any time, you know, if you have questions, we have an hour and a half, and I planned a little on the light side, anticipating some questions. The other thing I want to mention is that, you know, we're here to have a community conversation, and I want to remind folks that let's have respect for one another, let's not talk over one another, and let's take turns and so forth, so that everyone gets a chance to talk, and that we make this a productive conversation. So I thank you in advance for that. So to get started, the first thing I want to ask is, what do you love about Santa Cruz? All right, we're going to do just a couple little touchy-feely activities, but I'd love to hear, what do you love about Santa Cruz? What's your favorite thing about Santa Cruz?
Nature.
Nature. What else?
Ocean.
The ocean. Call them out.
Parks.
Pardon?
Parks.
Parks. Anybody else?
Organic food.
All right. What else?
Weather.
Yes. Great.
The vibe.
Excuse me?
The vibe.
The vibe. Right on.
Interesting people.
What else? What about any of our,
The diversity.
the university or the
The
diversity?
diversity.
The diversity.
Well, the university is part of that.
And the university.
Okay. What about some of our great landmarks here? Westcliff. Yes. Yeah. Anything else like that?
Pleasure Point.
Pleasure Point, technically in the county, but that's okay.
Coconut.
Coconut.
That's it.
Love those trees, right? Anybody else?
We're gonna have to La Viega.
De La Viega. Lots to do up there, right? You can throw a disc, you can golf, you can hike, you
Around
can
the Gulch.
Arana Gulch, our nice new pedestrian and bike pathway, and grazing. Anybody else?
Neary's Lagoon.
Neary Lagoon. Wonderful habitat, right? Great place to walk. Bird spotting. Anybody else?
Improving bicycle awareness and safety.
Bike, you've been noticing bike, you've been appreciating
friendly.
the bike safety,
Mhm.
bike friendly, okay, great. Anybody else? There was someone?
Water.
The wharf. Of course.
The harbor.
The harbor,
Beaches.
yes. Excellent.
The monarch.
The Monarchs, wonderful. Does anyone have any idea why I'm asking this? Go ahead.
Well, I just need somebody to put up the boardwalk.
The boardwalk, yes, of course. Anybody have any idea why I'm asking this question? I'm asking this question
All the
because,
non-human things that humans are destroying.
how about I put it this way? Pretty much everything on this list is impacted by climate change.
Yes.
Right? And so having this shared set of values around what we value in our community is a really good common starting point for us with this conversation, right? We're all on board with, hey, we want to protect those valuable assets of our community that we value and cherish so much, right? That's the point of that exercise. And I also want to acknowledge that some of us are more concerned about climate change than others, and that's okay, right? We all have different levels of interest. We all have different priorities and concerns. So I also want to acknowledge that that's okay as well. This was just a little slide to remind you of all those great things that we talked about, which I think you got almost all of them, right? Okay, so diving into what's going on here in Santa Cruz. I don't think it's a big surprise what our climate change impacts are. We like to categorize them as coastal and non-coastal only because it facilitates discussion. There's no real reason to separate them. But what we're facing, of course, is erosion along our bluff tops. and our coastal bases. We are facing rising tides, increased coastal storm flooding. As we know, the climate changing will increase temperatures and cause fluctuations on extreme and more frequent storms, as well as ocean acidification, and the potential for saltwater intrusion. We do not have any of our wells, which we are primarily a surface water city in terms of what our drinking water comes from. We do have some wells and none of them are inundated right now, unlike Soquel Creek Water District. In terms of the non-coastal impacts, with the increased temperature, we have an increased risk of wildfire. As we know, that's a very huge concern that's very prevalent for us in California right now. Clearly, we have the increased potential for landslide. I already mentioned the severe weather events, increased propensity for drought, as well as increased temperature influencing our availability of food and of energy and fuel. And lastly, it will impact or it is impacting our ecosystems and our habitats. So I think pretty much everything on that list we've kind of got going on here in Santa Cruz. But we know this, right? These are known things to us. We have the science to monitor them, and we have the ability to plan, right? And that's what this is all about here. So, just to kind of make it a little more real, and I want to emphasize that I am not attributing any of these damages necessarily to climate change. What I'm saying is that climate change could be a contributory factor into the extreme conditions that occurred last winter. But just to bring it home, last winter was the wettest winter on record. And our community experienced a lot of damage and impacts, including fatalities. So that really kind of nails for us why we need to be proactive, be aware, and be planning and taking action. So, next exercise. And I promise this is the last one where I'll write on the board. How does this make you feel? And any answer is a good answer. Anyone want to share? How does it make you feel? Just call it out.
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed.
Anxious.
Anxious.
Powerless.
Powerless.
Fighting mad.
Fighting mad. I'll just do that in caps, right? And that's fighting. Okay. What else?
Warm weather.
Pardon?
I rather like the warm weather.
That's fine. Like warm weather, concern for future generations.
Hopeless.
Helpless.
Sad.
Angry. Oh, you got more.
Anyone else? All right, this is a good list. I feel this way too. But I also feel hopeful. And I think one thing here that we found as we've been doing this research on how should we talk with the community, we found that acknowledging these feelings is important. It's an important piece here, so that's why we've done it. It might seem a little touchy-feely. I welcome. But we all have different feelings. Some people have a different perspective, and that's fine also. Okay, let's continue. So, what have we been doing and what's the adaptation plan? So the City of Santa Cruz first developed its first adaptation plan in 2011. It was adopted by City Council in 2012. And it was an appendix to our local hazard mitigation plan, which is a plan that is required to be recertified every 5 years by FEMA in order for us to maintain our flood protection designation for our levee and puts us in line for FEMA dollars if we keep that recertified. This time around, we did the local hazard mitigation plan and the climate adaptation plan updates concurrently. So how I like to think about the difference between the two of these is that the local hazard mitigation plan really specifies how we're going to handle acute disasters. The adaptation plan takes a more long-term look and specifically looks at climate impacts. Whereas the local hazard mitigation plan looks at things like tsunami is probably a bad example because tsunami could be exacerbated by sea level rise, but earthquake, for instance. So that's the difference between the two plans. So when we started this a year ago, we were aware and we knew that the state required, as part of the local hazard mitigation plan, the inclusion of a sea level rise vulnerability assessment. So the state is now making sure that coastal cities are including sea level rise assessments in their planning documents. So we hired Central Coast Wetlands Group, and they conducted our first sea level rise vulnerability assessment. And for those of you that did the activity in back and saw the overlay, that's one of the scenarios of the sea level rise vulnerability assessment. So what we looked at was rising tide, coastal storms, and erosion, those impacts, and projected over 3 different time horizons, including the baseline year, so that was 2010. We looked at 2030, 2060, and 2100. What would sea level rise and coastal impacts look like here in Santa Cruz? And so we looked at that at 2 different scenarios. One, that we would maintain our protective structures, so our pumps that pump water out down in the lower beach flats area near the levee, the seawalls that we already have, and the levee itself, right? And then we did another scenario that assumed failure of those protective devices out through those time horizons. I'm showing you what we think is the most likely scenario, and that is that we will keep up those protective structures, more or less, and you can still see what happened, and we'll be taking a look at this at the end. So that gave us some spatial and temporal, it allowed us to understand the possible spatial and temporal extent of those impacts, which we did not really have before. We did not map this kind of thing before. And what it also allowed us to do is identify what structures, infrastructure, and people were going to be vulnerable. Now, there's a lot of caveats. This is the start of what will be a number of analyses. This is using the best available science and the best modeling that is available right now, but we know that there are limitations to what we were able to do. I'll give you a couple examples. We weren't able to model the contribution of increased precipitation from climate change coming down the river in concert with rising tides and flooding from the coast. It's a next step we have identified. We also did not do a full-blown cost-benefit analysis that looks at what are the cost, loss of beaches, what will that cost us in terms of tourism? What is the shifting of monarch habitat? What is that dollar value? We only were able to look at buildings and infrastructure, and then I'll show you the other social, the people piece as well. We also were not able to look at an uncertain but identified very extreme scenario that shows sea level rise at 10 feet. We weren't able to look at that because that particular scenario predates the modeling the models that we use. So there are limitations, and I want to acknowledge that up front. We know that, but we also know what we need to do next. So, and I'll be sharing a lot of that with you. So the Climate Adaptation Plan does several things then. It creates a foundation about what do we know now. And we know now a lot more now than we did 5 years ago, believe it or not. The science has come a long way. We have more guidance on adaptation strategies and how to implement them, how to finance them. So that's all contained in the plan. And what can we expect to happen in the future? So again, I've already mentioned that we've projected out what we think these impacts will look like. And I have to also mention that the bulk of our analysis focused on sea level rise impacts. We did go and use data, updated data for wildfire and some of the other impacts, but that's another area, particularly around ecosystems and habitat, that we need to put more focus on, and that is called out as the next step as well. So just want to acknowledge that, you know, we've spent a lot of time on sea level rise, but that there are other impacts as well that are serious that need some more scientific attention as well. So what can we expect to happen? And then what are our options? So our climate adaptation plan contains, I believe, 61 different strategies that we recommend. They range from, as it says on the right, policy, infrastructure, and education. However, we also need to know, what does the community want to do? And I'll give you a good example, Westcliff, right? There's several options with Westcliff. We can continue to put up seawalls. The trade-off is loss of beaches. We could say no more seawalls. Let's get off the coast and do what's called managed retreat. The trade-off there is, what's the legal precedent for that kind of thing? How can you just take properties? You can't do that. So please don't leave this saying they're taking properties. We don't have any, plan for that. But I'm just showing you that there are different options and different trade-offs with these options. And we need the community to tell us what they want, what you want to see, what we want to see, so that the city isn't making decisions in a silo. And so that's why I think I might have mentioned, this is the kickoff of an outreach campaign. I have 20 events scheduled over the next 6 months, including a more expanded version of what we're doing here tonight, 3 community forums, where we're going to be collecting this information. The other piece, foundational piece that I didn't mention that I'm going to show you next here is our social vulnerability assessment. This is one of the first social vulnerability assessments to climate change that's been done in the state. And what we did, we were able to connect through the American Geophysicists Union with Dr. Giuliano Khalil, who was a grad student of Dr. Gary Griggs. Anybody know Dr. Gary Griggs? Heard his name before, right? He's the guru of this kind of stuff. So we were able to get this analysis completed for free, which was just a blessing, a godsend. So what we did is compile social vulnerability scores that were based on 5 factors: incidence of poverty, of elderly, crime, disability, and English not spoken well or at all. And we looked at those metrics. A lot of that came from census data. Our crime data was our police department's data. We built a score by census block group, which you see these little kind of neighborhoods, and then we mapped it. So what you see here is red are the block groups that have the highest social vulnerability. And green is the area that has the lowest social vulnerability. Now, I don't think there's any big surprises here. The Beach Flats area is an area of high social vulnerability based on a couple drivers. The incidence of English not spoken as a first language or at all, as well as the incidence of poverty. We also have a high social vulnerability area here, primarily driven by the fact that there are a number of elderly folks that live in this area. There's La Posada is in this area, and a couple of others. But we do see also some orange areas, which are medium high, that we should be concerned about. And what we've done, what this enables us to do, is we can overlay the sea level rise impacts mapping onto this map and see where they coincide. Then we can look at those drivers and say, how can we best help these folks to be prepared and to plan? I'll give you a very simple example. We know, of course, that down in this Beach Flats area, that flooding is a concern. We know the drivers of social vulnerability, and this may be obvious, but now we know that when we send the reverse 911 calls when there's an acute flooding incident, that we need to send them in English and in Spanish. That when we're doing planning, which by the way, our adaptation plan is online, it's fully translated as well. When we're doing signage, or flood notifications, flood insurance notifications, it needs to be in Spanish, right? So there's some very simple ways. We've just started to scratch the surface on how this social vulnerability can help us in our planning. But it's something I'm really excited about. I think it's something this community very much values. And so I'm very glad that we're able to do this, this work. Okay, continuing on then. So what have we been doing since 2011? Well, as I mentioned, there's policy, there's education, and there's infrastructure options, essentially. I have to admit, we haven't been doing a good job on the education piece, thus the 20 events, right? We know that we need to be out there doing a better job talking with the community, seeing what the community preferences are, and collecting data like this map in the back, which, by the way, being a former scientist and researcher, I took the whole citizen science title to heart, because many of these things we're doing today are data points for us, right? We can go back and use some of these comments that you've made in our funding applications for grants. This information that we're doing back in the back, which I'll get to and explain in a moment, we are also collecting that data and mapping it, digitizing it and mapping it on GIS and have it posted on our website so that people can see real time what other folks in the community are concerned about. So really trying to leverage technology to engage folks really fully here. But other things that we're doing, so that's the education piece. And we have lots ahead on education, not just with the outreach events, but at the end I want to talk to you about, that's what this little box is. Anybody seen this before? It just launched yesterday. This is a virtual reality viewer, and so I'm going to talk more about this in a moment. And some of you, if you're interested, should download this app, lookahead-sf.org, to see their virtual reality viewer. And I'm going to talk more about this in a moment. Okay. Since 2011, this is not an all-inclusive list, I just want to mention. And if you're interested in fully what we've been doing, please go online and check out our adaptation plan update. It's in a draft format right now. And I should mention that this plan update is not done. We completed the draft in October. It got packaged with our local hazard mitigation plan and went to Cal Office of Emergency Services. And then it will go on to FEMA as well. In the meantime, we are collecting feedback from regulatory agencies, i.e. the Coastal Commission primarily, and we're collecting feedback from the community. And all of that will get incorporated, this mapping, this kind of data, will get incorporated into the adaptation plan update and then put in front of City Council for adoption. I'm hoping in March, but a lot of the timing depends on the regulatory reviews. So that's kind of what's happening next in terms of this document. Okay, so progress on the plan. We did have to relocate our emergency operations center to De La Viega Park. It was previously in an area that was prone to flooding and had some road issues. We are working on a habitat restoration plan for Branson 40 Creek. We got a CAL FIRE grant to more than double our annual urban tree plantings that we do, as well as conduct an urban tree inventory. That's a GIS-based, a map-based tree inventory that will allow us to improve management of our urban forests. We've raised all but one, the Highway 1 bridge in Santa Cruz to accommodate flooding and debris coming down the river. We've also initiated our local coastal program update. So our local coastal program is the mechanism that allows the city to issue coastal development permits. So the coastal zone extends from a few blocks to a couple miles inland, depending on where you're at. And the Coastal Commission regulates the coastal zone via the Coastal Act. They allow cities to issue coastal development permits, so permits for buildings, construction, major modifications that are within the coastal zone. They allow the city to do that if they have a certified local coastal plan, which we do. We're in the process of recertifying that, and per state requirements, we are including policies around sea level rise. That is anticipated. I think it's been slightly delayed. We've had some turnover in our planning staff, and we were originally intending that to go to the Coastal Commission, the administrative draft here near the end of the year. That's now been delayed for a few months, which is fine, no big deal. We also have designed beach nourishment. So what beach nourishment is transferring sand or sediment from one location to another to bolster the beach and the integrity of the beach. And we have designed a beach nourishment plan that we are been continuing to search for funding from various state agencies from the San Lorenzo River. And then of course we've done the sea level rise and the social vulnerability assessments. Again, these are just some major snapshots of really a whole large list of strategies, including the Water Supply Advisory Committee's work to bolster resiliency of our water supply. Certainly can be considered an adaptation strategy. That's one of our highest priorities is maintaining our water supply, and many others, as I mentioned. Okay. Let's now kind of turn towards what can we do, or what are we planning to do, what are we recommending, and what can you do to get involved. So these are goals that have come directly from our adaptation plan update. Consider climate change impacts in planning and decision-making processes. We have called out in our adaptation plan update that a mechanism that will ensure that. We're trying to move forward having on our staff reports, which many of you may know that a staff report goes to City Council. They get a number of them for every council meeting, and it informs them about the particular issue or program that comes up. We have proposed putting on staff reports as a standard section, how is climate adaptation considered in this policy program or project? So if the plan gets adopted, that will happen, unless for some reason it gets pulled out, and I really don't think it will, because this was called out in 2011, it didn't happen, and I'm pretty committed to making it happen, because then we can evaluate all decisions through a climate change lens, right? Coordinate adaptation planning with other land use plans. I've already mentioned our local coastal program, our local hazard mitigation plan. We also have our general plan, which is the guiding document for the city in terms of how we develop, how we regulate, and so forth. So there is a lot of cross-pollination that needs to happen in integration. We've already done the local hazard mitigation plan, the local coastal program, but there are a number of other plans that need to integrate what we've learned through this process, and vice versa. Collaborate with others to raise awareness about climate change impacts. Well, here we all are, right? And we're talking about this. But I want you to know that I have a little team of advisors. Pauline Seals is one of them over here. Roland Sayers is one of them. I also have some other technical advisors that are helping me to figure out, helping us to figure out what's the best way to get out in the community and talk about this stuff. For example, this exercise in the back, we tested out with our Climate Action Task Force Adaptation Subcommittee. So those folks are really helping me. There are also nonprofit groups, like, has anyone heard of Regeneration, a nonprofit that's in Pajaro Valley? It's a grassroots outfit that is using youth to generate awareness around climate change, and have just undertaken a major survey to take the pulse of what folks think about climate change in the Pajaro Valley. We're trying to partner with them on how do we get to youth, how do we get to the Hispanic population effectively. We are also partnering with Groundswell Coastal Ecology, who is the nonprofit in Santa Cruz that has done coastal restoration work at both Natural Bridges and at Seabright Beach. We're doing that so that we can expand their ability. We can have some community coastal restoration work days, which you'll learn more about that as we firm up the details of that coming in the spring. So lots of folks, and if you're one of those folks that is interested in being engaged on this topic, please let me know. I'll give you my card and I'll invite you to our conversations. Our adaptation subcommittee of the Climate Action Task Force meets quarterly. We can meet more frequently if needed. Quarterly seem to be a good fit so far. This is the first year we've had subcommittees of the task force. Also, incorporate ongoing monitoring process to inform decisions. This is a major piece that I'm trying to get funded. What are the metrics that we need to measure, and what are the thresholds on those metrics that once we tip the threshold, it triggers a specific action? We don't have that in place right now. One of the first things I'm trying to do is with the county, we need to get a tidal gauge here in Santa Cruz. We don't have one. The closest one is in, I think, Moss Landing. That's just a very kind of easy one to do, right? But I'm also searching for funding to help us figure out what does our monitoring program need to look like. Seek opportunities to develop an environmentally sustainable economy. I think really how I interpret this is that, you know, we are very reliant on, I shouldn't say very reliant, but tourism is a big part of our economy, right? So we have to, and the coastal commissions, that's one of the comments that they've given me on the plan, is that it's light on focusing on the tourism economy, which again, I've already mentioned, that's something that we weren't able to quantify this time around, but is definitely a near-term action. And you know, same thing with like ag, with organic food. You know, we grow organic food and have farmers markets here. That's a part of the economy that we want to ensure is sustainable, right? So just a couple examples. This is a big one that we cannot forget, and I got to thank Pauline and her gals for reminding me. We have to keep reducing emissions, right? If we have any chance to slow this down. And maybe, Pauline, you can hold up that 9 simple things card that I have there. So Ecology Action developed this little postcard. It's called 9 Simple Things. And it's 9 simple things you can do to reduce emissions. And yeah, if you don't mind, can you let people kind of take those? Because that's actually all I've got. They only gave me 100. They said that's all you get. So if you, please take one if you want one. Otherwise, they're online also, but I just need to be a little sparing on that. I'm also looking, now one thing that I do want to mention about this 9 simple steps is that it calls out things like go solar, buy an EV. Well, when we're trying to think about social equity here, those maybe aren't the actions that everybody can take, right? There's big costs involved with those. So I'm also looking for, and I think someone brought up Paul Hawkins' book here somewhere. We're looking for ways that we can provide simple information on really simple actions. So that's forthcoming also. But yes, we need to continue to reduce emissions. And then of course we need to minimize the impacts of future sea level rise, which is really the thrust of what we've been talking about here. Let's see here. What are we doing here at the city? Well, we're monitoring and protecting our wastewater facility, which is one of our critical facilities that is potentially at risk. We have taken some measures already to protect some of our tanks from buoyancy issues that could happen, and a number of other things that we've done. Evaluate decisions through a climate lens. I've already talked to you about what I'm trying to get through, which is on the staff report. Potentially, coastal armoring, although I have to tell you that the Coastal Commission's regulatory perspective is that they want to get away from coastal armoring. They want to see people get off the coast. They want to see people move back. To preserve coastal vegetation and natural shorelines, I've mentioned that we have at least one nonprofit that's working on that. This also is a requirement for any development that's in the coastal zone, is that coastal vegetation, native vegetation, is to be retained or restored. And then we have managed retreat is another thing that we're considering, right? This is all gets back to what is the community value? Coastal armoring, retreat. Really, there's some trade-offs there. And I want to emphasize that I'm not diving too deep into the possible suite of solutions right now. We're still developing how that particular piece is going to look like for our forums. but I'll share with you what we're intending, and maybe I can talk about the virtual reality now too. What we're intending to do in our forums is to take a couple areas that we know where there's problems, the beach flats area and erosion along West Cliff. And what we want to do is talk through the adaptation options and their trade-offs, I've already mentioned some of the trade-offs, in detail with the community. And then we want to take the pulse of the community. What would you prefer to see? Managed retreat, getting off the coast, or more seawalls? That's just one example. How I would like to do that, this isn't going to happen for this outreach campaign over the next 6 months, but what I'd like to do is what a couple other communities in California have done, and that is use virtual reality to show folks, here's what the climate change impacts look at different time horizons. Here's some different choices for what adaptation options look like. What do you think? Because, and I really encourage you folks to take a look at, and I have a video that shows Santa Monica Pier did this, and they were the first ones to do it, and it's powerful. It's really powerful. Just yesterday, San Francisco launched the second generation. It's called Look Ahead. It's an app that you guys all can download right now on your Android or iPhone. And it's the same thing. It shows you, here's what the Embarcadero looks like at year 21, is projected to look like in year 2100. Here's a couple different actions that we can take. And then there's questions embedded in the app. So it's a data collection platform on top of you know, a really good communication tool to show. Because, you know, I'm thinking about these forums and I'm thinking, okay, we're going to do some 2D drawings, but really, it's really hard to bring to life this kind of thing without kind of the 3D experience. So we are applying for a NOAA grant that is public education on climate hazards. It seems pretty perfectly tailored for us. We are working with these folks, their name's Climate Access, that developed this Look Ahead app. And cross your fingers for us that we get this grant, because if we do, it'll probably take us about 6 months. We'll probably get the grant in maybe March or June. Take us maybe 3 to 6 months to develop the actual app, the scenarios, and so forth. And then we would deploy it in a year. So that will be round 2 of our outreach. We're really focusing on the details and the nitty-gritty of the options that we have available that we need the community to weigh in on. So let me just show you real quick before I continue. Let me show you what this looked like for Santa Monica Pier, because it's pretty cool. And I'll just let the whole thing run since we have time. And I'm not sure, I don't think there's any volume associated with this. So what they're showing right now, I lost it, big crap. Nope, okay. So what it's showing right now is the 1920 shoreline, that yellow dashed line on the right-hand side. And what you can do with these things is pan around in a 360-degree direction. They're panning kind of back and forth from the pier. And then they're going to show some projected where they think sea level rise will come to. So they've done beach nourishment, replacing the sand, which can be very pricey, by the way.
Excuse me, what city is this?
This is Santa Monica, Santa Monica Pier.
Right.
So a lot of text here, I'm probably won't do so much text, but here you go now. Here's some of the flooding that can occur right now. You see it comes all the way up to their parking lot, passes their lifeguard stations. Now they don't show adaptation strategies, and this is actually first generation of this virtual reality. We would be doing second gen, but again, you can express how much you're concerned. I'm not sure if they, if that's it. I don't know if they show another one or not. Here we go. So more, this is wave action. So they're looking at different drivers of erosion and loss of beach. So as I mentioned, San Francisco just launched theirs yesterday. I really encourage you to download the app because you can do this whole experience on your cell phone, even without this viewer. This viewer just has some, let me show you, has some little lenses that make it a more immersive 3D experience. But frankly, I looked at it via the cell phone and I thought it was easier. This was a little more challenging to look at. So stay tuned on that. This, I think, is really something that will help us to not only engage the community, but get that crucial feedback and collect data. We can even, folks can indicate if they want to be on a list to potentially be in a focus group or get newsletters, that kind of thing. So this can really be leveraged. Okay, yeah, this is an adaptation strategy. So this is a vegetated dune with a bridge structure. So this is one potential adaptation strategy that they've looked at, is this dune. And that's all virtual reality there. Pretty cool, huh? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let me get back to our presentation. So as I mentioned, this is something that I think will be really a really key tool for our community as we continue with this conversation. Okay. So just take a pause here and think about Jane Goodall and a quote that she says, you cannot go through a single day with having impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Just the sheer fact of you folks being here, I mean, you're giving us data, you're participating, and that makes a difference. You know, we want this, the outcomes of this plan to be very much community driven. We want the solutions to be.
Oh my gosh.
I think that's the video going still. Let me close that real quick. Sorry about that.
A diagram right now.
I think that's something else happening at the Santa Monica Pier. Okay. So just, you know, I think that sometimes when we have these conversations, they can be gloom and doom oriented. So I think it's kind of nice to take a pause and remember that we're all working towards solutions together here. And so I thank you again for coming here for that. As I've already mentioned, I haven't mentioned this, but I want to share with you that we actually really are considered a leader in this space.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, not a lot of cities have done sea level rise and social vulnerability assessments yet. We are also one of the lead agencies on a FEMA EPA grant that the Central Coast got to build a regional resilience toolkit for local governments. So we're one of the leading agencies on that grant effort. And, you know, I get asked to go up and down the coast and talk about what we're doing. So we truly are leaders. And not only in the adaptation space, but in the emissions mitigation space, the emissions reduction space. As I'm sure you guys all know, we have our Green Business Program. We put on one heck of an Earth Day every year. We have our Go Solar Santa Cruz campaign. I have some brochures over here that are guidance brochures on how to do residential solar, how to navigate the process. We sponsor Bike to Work. We have Bike to Work events and EV rides, ride and drives, I think that's what it's called, and e-bikes we just did. And we have our green building program, which every development that comes to the city has to go through. So I just want to remind everybody that we, you know, as a city, and not just the city and its staff itself, but all of you. I mean, we have the Santa Cruz Climate Action Network. We have Regeneration. We have Ecology Action. We have a number of nonprofits that are working in this space and truly making an impact. So I just want to remind us all that there's a lot of good work going on here. But we do know that there's more work to do. And some of those things that I've already mentioned, some of them, the San Lorenzo River fluvial analysis, the cost-benefit analysis of business as usual versus implementation of adaptation strategies. I think the cost will really speak volumes. Can we really continue to build seawalls? You know, when will that become cost prohibitive? Alternately, look at what are the impacts to tourism in terms of cost. I mean, there are a number of things that we need to look at in terms of cost benefit. The outreach campaign, completing the local coastal program update, I've already mentioned. Adoption by City Council in early 2018. Annual reporting. We've also, as I do for climate action, so emissions mitigation, I report once annually to City Council on that. We also are calling out reporting once annually on climate adaptation in the plan update. So if it gets adopted, that will start to happen. And then of course, continued analysis and implementation of some of these strategies. You know, I've already mentioned some low-hanging fruit, the tidal gauges, more notifications in the beach flats areas. The fire department has a lot of cross-agency coordination going on. You know, so these are all things, some of the things we're doing already, not just for climate adaptation purposes, but some things are specifically geared towards adaptation. And if you're, again, interested, please take a look at our climate adaptation plan update. The draft is on our website. You can do a search for City of Santa Cruz climate adaptation and it'll come up. I have a fact sheet over here that has a tiny URL that you can also grab that'll take you right there. You can not only get our draft update, which again, comments, please email me comments. If you have comments at the end of this, let me know and I'll write it down because that's all going to become part of the plan update. Also, I have on the website the PowerPoint that I presented to City Council and to all the commissions late in the summer. It provides a little bit more detail on the sea level rise vulnerability assessment that I haven't really shared here. Shows some maps and so forth. And the adaptation plan update has probably 50 maps in it. You might get map fatigue though if you take a look at that. So I do encourage you to look at that. And then the other piece, I think that might be my next slide. No, 2 more slides on this. So before I round things out, I wanna end on really a call to action for you folks to continue to reduce your emissions. Just 3 simple things, not so simple really. Assess your preparedness for climate change impacts, and I want to expand on that more in our forums. You know, are you in a flood-prone area? Are you in a landslide area? And if so, what can you do to prepare for that? And then bold, please participate in the future conversations that are coming up about solutions. And let's see here. Okay, before we're totally done here, the last activity that we have is the mapping, which is in the back. Some of you have already done it, which is great. And what we're interested in knowing is where are you concerned about climate change impacts and which ones? So what I'd love for you to do, there's dots back there. Each dot color corresponds to a different impact. If you are concerned about an impact that doesn't have a color, grab a pen and just draw it right on the map and tell me what it is down in the key area. What we're doing with this information, oops, wait a second, is that we're compiling it at our website in GIS, Geographic Informational Systems, and doing these cluster maps. So this is a result of City Hall to You that we did November 15th in the Seabright area. And we had folks go ahead and map by color where they're concerned about things. The size of the symbol shows the number of folks that were concerned about it. So this might mean that there were more than 3 folks that were concerned here about this. When you guys put your dots up, we're going to digitize those and add them to the map so that you all can see what each other are concerned about. And these become data points that we can then reference to our regulatory agencies, to the grant makers, and so forth. So this is just kind of one tool for us to provide feedback on the feedback you've provided to us. So we'll be continually updating this, and I would love for you to please come back and place dots on the map. I also have an overlay on the map that shows the scenario that I mentioned. It's our protection scenario where our protective structures are hold through 2100, but you can still see there are some impacts. No big surprises. It's erosion along West Cliff and increased flooding in the beach flats, harbor, and some areas of natural bridges, as well as increased incidence of wildfire that we're able to map right now. So we can certainly flip that over so you can check out what we're projecting based on the sea level rise vulnerability assessment. I think it's kind of interesting to see where people map things and then we flip it over and see, you know, what the projections are. I thought that that could be interesting. That's why we kind of did this overlay map. So I would love for folks to do that, and then we can take questions while people are mapping, or yeah, we can just keep talking. Please.
Are you ready for questions?
I'm ready.
Alan Miller, we met before.
Yes, we have. Hi.
I have a suggestion for you by
Okay.
way of tying together some of the things that you showed us in a way that you might not have thought of doing.
That sounds
And
great.
it's kind of off the top of my head, but
Lay it on me.
you know, I'll lay it on and maybe it'll be useful, maybe worthless. All right, so you've talked about the look ahead, which sounds very powerful. Presumably, look ahead is going to create a visual representation in Santa Cruz as to, you know, here's the bad stuff that might happen with sea level rise. Now, I don't know what the assumptions are in it on how much sea level rise it's going to consider, but, you know, I'll assume maybe it has the possibility of considering various levels of sea level rise.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you also talked about what we can all do about the problem, you know. At a local level, certainly we can drive less and cut our CO2 emissions. You know, if we all do that, it's probably not going to affect global warming over the whole world too much. But another thing that we as a community can do is we can urge for local action, state action, national action,
Absolutely.
international action, cutting down, well, primarily cutting down CO2 emissions, but there are probably even other measures that can be considered at some point, but I won't go into that today.
Absolutely.
But here's my suggestion. The scientific community has the information now to say, for example, if we continue along what's called the business as usual path of CO2 emissions, here's what the rate of sea level rise is going to be
Yep.
in future years. And out of those same models, the world also has, well, if we manage to hold the CO2 emissions down to the level that the world agreed to in Paris in 2015, here's what sea level rise will be, and it's how much lower than
Yes.
business as usual. So my suggestion is, in the look ahead information you're going to generate, just to cut to the chase, it would be really great to be able to say, here's what Santa Cruz is going to look like under the business as usual emissions scenario of the world, and here's what Santa Cruz is going to look like if the world fulfills its commitments that are made in Paris in 2015. That's just kind of an example. But am I getting the idea across?
Totally. I totally get where you're coming from with that. Unfortunately, I'm going to share a practical reality with you, and that is when we did this sea level rise modeling, it can be done. It wasn't done that way. We made assumptions about the emission scenarios at various time horizons. And so what we can say is that this is how I frame it, and this is how I sometimes talk about H++, the extreme scenario, is that we can show the assumptions we made, you know, about the emissions scenario, but then what we can do is frame it in terms of the time horizon and say, listen, if this goes along the business as usual trajectory, here's what the impacts are projected to look like, and they're going to come sooner. If for some reason we're able to fulfill our Paris agreements or get anywhere close, that's going to push out the impacts a little bit further, right? In time, more likely.
Well, more than a little bit.
Right. Well, that's how we're framing things, because practically, can we go back and model this? Yes, if I can get some more dollars to do so, but it's not something I can do physically. I have to hire someone to do that. But point taken, honestly, point taken. And I think maybe I should have some more discussion about that.
Yeah, fine. If you need some help trying to do it, let me know.
Okay. Tell me your last name again.
Miller,
Thank you, Ellen.
just like the beer.
Gotcha. Anyone else? Sure.
Could we be provided with a topographic contour map showing elevations?
Topographic, yes. So do you want a topographic map that shows elevations with the sea level rise projections? Because I don't have that, but I could probably work with our GIS guy to figure
Well,
that
if we just
out.
had a contour map of the city or the county, then for any given number of meters of sea level rise, we can see up to what contour it goes.
Sure, but remembering the seawalls and so forth also. I think Pauline has a comment on your comment, so that's why I'm asking her.
I have a color-coded map of the whole downtown and shelf area that I often bring.
Is
to
it a
display.
topographic map with elevational?
It's basically, that's hidden in the legend, but it's colored so that all the low-lying areas are red and then they go orange and so forth. So for the general public that isn't all that good on topographic maps, it's a visual way of looking at it and seeing how much area is extremely flat and very close to sea level.
What's your
So that's
source
one
for
way.
that? Do you know what your source was for that? Is it USGS? They usually provide, USGS usually
A
provides.
student who was doing research for me got me it, so I don't
Okay.
totally know.
Well, you
But
know,
I'll send it you.
okay, great. And I would suggest if you're able to get online, USGS, the US Geological Society, maintains topographic maps. It's not something that I have right now, but it's point taken, and I'll try to dig that up. Thank you.
This is very impressive. I live in the county, not in the city. Is
Yes.
there a counterpart to you in the county that's doing this sort of work?
Yes.
On the county level? And if so, do you know?
Yes.
what-
Yes, I happen to be on the County Commission on the Environment, so
That's good.
so I do know about this. I live in Capitola, which is
Yeah,
major
okay, I'm in
problems.
SoCal, so
Yeah.
I'm a little better off.
Yeah, yeah. Fortunately, I'm up in the jewel box, so not down in the village. But yes, they do not have someone like me that only works on this stuff, but they have a planner. His name's David Carlson. They use the same Central Coast Wetlands Group to do their sea level rise vulnerability assessment as we did, as did Capitola. So they have done a vulnerability assessment. One caveat, and I'm not sure why they did this, is that when these models were originally generated, they considered no protective structures, so no seawalls. So they're projecting like a worst case scenario. We said, no, we need to also consider the seawalls. We need to look at it both ways because we don't want to frighten people by showing them that, seawalls and stuff have failed. And at any rate, but they have the same kind of maps that I have back here. They do have that. I'm not sure that they have released a report on it yet. But I'm trying to collaborate with them. I've already told you on like the tidal gauge, as well as we actually, the Commission on the Environment had a joint commission meeting, this is the county, with Fish and Wildlife, as well as the Water Commission. And our sole focus, was anybody at that tri-commission meeting that was last month? Gary Griggs came, gave his amazing presentation. Because there were 3 commissions there, we had public comments from the community. Believe it or not, we had some climate change deniers there, which was a little surprising to me. But we are trying to figure out, adaptation has become a high priority for the Commission on the Environment, as it has really for anybody that's on the coast right now. And we're trying to figure out amongst those 3 commissions who's gonna handle what. So it's on our work plan this year, and staff supports our work plan. One of the major things that we felt we needed to do is communicate up to the supervisors more on, not only what the county's done, but what the city's done and what the county can do. The county is not out doing outreach like I am.
That was gonna
There-
kind of segues into my next question,
Yeah.
which is, there's a lot of places that do educational events, but I have yet to find a calendar that really pulls everything from, say, UCSC or this, which I happen to just look on the, if anyone has one that's.
So you need to talk to Pauline Seals, Santa
Okay.
Cruz Climate Action Network. You need to get on her mailing list because that woman
That's-
compiles every
Everything.
outreach event
Okay.
and more.
Like
So
Brio, UCSC,
I
all
mean,
of these.
I don't-
Okay, that's
yeah,
the answer.
yeah,
to my
I think
question.
you need to connect up with her. And I don't know how she does it, but because it's a big task to pull
Well, there's
from
so
all
many
these different,
places.
Exactly.
There's the water district and there's the, if there's
Exactly.
anything that's gonna have so many different facets to it, it's gotta be this.
yeah, absolutely.
Which I'm really glad you're working with the county.
Thanks. And as I mentioned, we're doing this, this regional grant that we got from EPA and FEMA to provide on a regional basis, so it's tailored for the Central Coast, which the Central Coast in terms of the state, extends from Santa Cruz down to Ventura, believe it or not. And so it's a pretty wide area, but what we're trying to provide is a toolkit for local, because local governments, we're really lucky like that our electeds and our department heads said, yeah, take some money and go do that sea level rise vulnerability assessment. Other folks are having to rely on free viewers that are less sophisticated and just do it themselves rather than have consultants and professionals do it. So this toolkit is meant to show folks, here's the range of options in terms of doing a vulnerability assessment, doing outreach, and we're using Santa Cruz as a lot of examples for this because we're already doing it. You know, so what I'm hoping is I can leverage that with the county and we can do some more collaboration on the outreach piece because obviously we're all in it together. I mean, we share contiguous coastlines, right? So, yeah, but I know that internally, as far as the analysis and updating their development and planning documents, they are working on this stuff. It's just maybe not getting out as well as it could or should.
You talked about, I think, a local hazards assessment
Yes.
and the adaptation report you
Yes.
mentioned, and the former earthquakes being something that was sort of separate from climate
Yes.
change. But on the adaptation, you talked about having two scenarios where levees and pumps are maintained and then they're not. There's another interaction here where you
That's
can
right.
maintain the levees and pumps, but you have an earthquake that causes seismic damage
You're
to the
absolutely right.
levees or knocks the pumps out of operation or damages seawalls. So is there also an analysis being done of the possible interactions of earthquakes with these protective structures that you might be relying on for the adaptation?
Sure. So there, aside from the Loch Lomond Reservoir and the dam, there's nothing that I know of in terms of how, well, I shouldn't say that because I also don't know the extent that the folks in Public Works are talking to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers about the levee. And I'm sure earthquake comes into the conversation there. It just might not be something I'm privy or, you know, not something I'm informed on right now. I don't have a study going on with respect to earthquakes, but what we did do for the purposes of this study, the sea level rise study, is we did have a scenario that we would assume that all those structures would fail, which would be an earthquake situation, some other kind of power outage kind of thing, something like that. You bring up a good point though. I thought you were gonna say something about fracking, you know, the connection between fracking but you know, I don't think that's gonna be an issue here because I think we've all adopted resolutions against that here. But point taken, let me write that down about earthquake analysis. And you know, a lot of this also, I'm continually looking at the landscape of funding opportunities. And I hate to say it, but frankly, a lot of this stuff sometimes only gets done if I can get a grant for it. So I'm kind of opportunistic in that way, like that would be something that FEMA would definitely fund, you know, and I know they have some grants coming out. So that's something that I could integrate maybe with some other analyses. So thank you for bringing that up. I hadn't even really thought about that particular analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, a question to preface it with you've given a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Remind me, anybody else, I can't recall what fluvial analysis is.
It is. Fluvial is the river. It's just analyzing the contribution of increased precipitation on the San Lorenzo River in combination with sea level rise. So we only looked at, for the purpose of our sea level rise vulnerability study, we only looked at the contribution of sea level rise into the San Lorenzo River. We didn't look at increased precipitation events that could happen from climate change that would cause more water to come down the river. So our maps are actually underestimating the flooding potential along the river right now. That's why I'm explicit about that we couldn't do it, we couldn't afford to do it this time around, but it is a next step. It's
Yeah.
one of my high priority next step analyses. Thank you for the question. Hi.
So Santa Cruz has a climate action plan.
Correct.
Why is this separate? Why is adaptation separate?
You know, that's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer for it. Traditionally, we do talk about these topics separately, even though they are obviously interdependent, interrelated. I'm not sure of the history of why they were done separately when they were. I think it has to do with the fact that I think what the driver was in 2011 to include climate adaptation was that the state was starting to become concerned with it. They wanted local hazard mitigation plans to have adaptation in them. So the city did an adaptation plan, which they thought what kind of over and above what was required for the local hazard mitigation plan. And around the same time, our climate action plan was adopted. So I think they were developed overlapping, not necessarily along the exact concurrent timeline, but an overlapping timeline. And, you know, this time around, I didn't even really think about combining them because our climate action plan sunsets in 2020, and this needed to be done this year. And the climate action plan, the next time around, we did it internally in 2011, 2012. We need some consultant work on that. Right now in the climate action plan, we have milestones that we don't have measurable metrics for, so we can't track them. There wasn't sufficient analysis done to see what's achievable and what's the stretch goal, that kind of thing. So, I guess I'm kind of talking in a circle, but a number of factors that I think, but really going forward, they likely probably should be integrated. So, you bring up a good point. Fortunately, I'm the person that's kind of leading both of them, so I'm able to kind of integrate, and you will see in the adaptation plan update, I heavily reference the climate action plan for a number of things, but probably would be a good idea to look at integrating them in the future. A lot of it depends on the funding that's going to come out over the next few years also. I'm expecting, I'm kind of considering this adaptation plan update as a living document because there are so many next step analyses that need to happen. The fortunate thing is there's a lot of dollars from the state coming out right now on adaptation planning. I applied for 3 grants this year just on adaptation. There used to be a lot of dollars for climate action, for emissions mitigation. There still are dollars, but it seems like adaptation has kind of superseded mitigation as a focus in the state, with the exception, I'd say, of EVs, electric vehicles, and fleet electrification, vehicle electrification. There's a lot of dollars right now in that space also, which we also have pursued. So I don't have a great answer for you, I'm sorry, admittedly, but there's some factors that played into it, I think. Yes, hi.
How much, if at all, do your analysis currently impact any current planning major decisions that are being made, such as moving the library and having 5 stories of cars on top of them, or whatever else?
I know that due to community input, that these things are being considered. Because right now there is no mechanism that forces the city, nor is there policy that forces the city to, I don't know how to say it, to maybe focus their decision-making in that way. It's not happening. Now, I should caveat that, we've gotten this question about the downtown and the downtown recovery plan. And, some of the responses that we have is that right now, the way the downtown recovery plan reads is that there's no residential or critical services allowable in new development on the first floor. On the first floor of a multi-story building, right? That extends, of course, to the library. I would say we are really at the beginning of analyzing the policy prescriptions that we need to do. And I know that it's not going fast enough for some people. Here we are having a conversation and we're not really even ready to have those conversations. However, I'm trying to force those conversations. I did talk with planning yesterday about this kind of thing, about how would some of these, what are the trade-offs of some of these strategies in terms of regulatory agency, in terms of cost, and I'm talking about policy prescriptions here, as well as how do these feasibly come to fruition. And there are some right now that I have to tell you that I don't know how, we don't know how, say, if the community says, yeah, we want managed retreat, we don't know how we're gonna do that. There is very little precedence for that. There are legal issues associated with that. Now, if the community says we want all seawalls and somehow the Coastal Commission blesses that, how are we gonna raise funds to do that? That's, I think, $145 million. Are we gonna do a bond measure? Are we gonna do a tax? You know, like, we're not even talking about that at the city. You know, we don't wanna put the cart ahead of the horse there. So you bring up a really good question. Again, I don't have a good answer for you, but that it's right now, a lot of focus at the city is on this. And so I intend to drive those conversations and keep pushing. Hi, Roland.
Are you pushing also in the direction of motivating the city council to look at the parking structure or not parking structure through an ecological lens?
Yeah. I'm really haven't been brought into those conversations yet. There is a committee that's tasked with evaluating that. That is supposed to be one of the things that they're considering. I know that early on in the conversation, I did have an early conversation with folks that are on that team. It seemed like they were very supportive of a LEED certified building. I know that, which is, for those of you that don't know what LEED is, it is, there are several tiers. It's a standard for building green buildings, and there are several tiers of it. Our library administration and library administration, they share a building that's a gold certified building. I know that our chief librarian has built 2 LEED certified libraries in Minnesota. That's all I know though, right now about that. And I wish I could share more with you about it, but I really haven't been a key person on this team, unfortunately. And I think that their intent is to bring me back in when the recommendations, or when the I shouldn't say the recommendations, when the options are more fleshed out. But
They have been, you can pick up a copy of the 4 possibilities that's being thrown around.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Library Commission.
I know, unfortunately, I can't insert myself in some conversations. I need to be directed to do that, unfortunately, and I've been directed to stand down for a bit on that. I was at the beginning of the year, and I'm sorry I don't have a good answer.
But as a concerned citizen,
I hear
plus your status.
I hear you, yeah. Thank you for that comment, yeah.
What happens, you're sort of saying, if the Coastal Commission is recommending one thing, and the people in Santa Cruz want something else, what happens?
Well, right now, the Coastal Commission has guidelines. They don't have policies. So it's not a requirement to say no more seawalls. They understand that in some conditions, seawalls are appropriate. I think that I'm talking about maybe their general perspective on things. A lot of this will be negotiated through the local coastal program, the recertification, which is happening right now. The county's going through the same thing right now. They're updating their local coastal program also. So it's really TBD, you know. We kind of have slowed our pace a little on the local coastal program update to see like what's happening up in Marin, because they are facing kind of a similar thing with, you know, they retreat isn't going to work for them. And I mean, and the Coastal Commission has to look at Santa Cruz and you know, how can the city tell the boardwalk it has to move, right? That's a private property. So I think in more urbanized areas, there needs to be more flexibility. on that, and I think that's what's gonna come out of it. I mean, we have to remember that the Coastal Commission has issued these guidelines for the first time. And maybe they need to tweak it a bit more or be more flexible to accommodate. And that's the indications that we're getting from Coastal Commission leadership, is that there's gonna be some flexibility here. And that's why I really want, like, if we can do the virtual reality, or even if we can't do it, when we get more towards solutions, that's when we need to have Coastal here and talking about that and engaged in the conversation, I think. So you bring up a good point, though. Other folks, any other questions, comments? Okay. Yes.
I have an easy one of curiosity. Why does Santa Cruz need its own tidal gauge?
We were going to, with the county,
Why does Santa Cruz and the county need its own tidal gauge?
because it allows us to monitor sea level rise.
It's not the same tide that affects San Francisco or Monterey or places that
There-
have tide gauges already?
There are some differences regionally, yeah.
Gary Griggs' report has a lot of details about that.
Every day. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Do you have a list where we can look what you said 20 outreach events will be?
It's going to be on our website. We're still finalizing the locations of our forums, but I do have most of them. A lot of it also we're doing is a lot of tabling at bookmobiles, at mobile home parks, at story time at the library, at the farmers market. We have 3 coastal restoration work days that we're planning. We're planning a coastal awareness walk in the summer, 4 walks, where it'll be me leading it and me pointing out things and trouble spots and potential adaptation options. That'll probably be out closer to the end of the year. But we're in the process of revamping our adaptation web page. And so I'm going to be adding a calendar there, as well as you can sign up for updates on when those events are happening, that kind of thing. I am for sure going to get that schedule into Pauline's hands so that it gets out into the community. So I'd say within a month that's going to be finalized and we'll be able to publish it. Other folks? Okay, we have 10 minutes. Is there anybody in the room that hasn't done the activity in the back or wants to see the overlay of the sea level rise projections? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attention. Really appreciate it. And please stay in touch.
Because it's already pretty close.
Uniformity that leads to the central coast.
You can't really tell just by looking at that, I guess.
Okay, thank you.